So a very famous social scientist, Thomas Piketty, has written this book in which he says that in 2020 specifically, what happens is that during that time, of when industrial revolution started, you had the working hours which were of 14, 15, 17, 18 hours a day, right? And how child laborers were working in shifts and all of that. So he's saying that the kind of working hours that Marx was writing about at that point of time, capitalism has changed. The working hours now in this 2020 or in 2019 remains the same. So we are going to have a revolution. Some kind of ramification will happen. So if you guys want to have a video on Thomas Piketty, I can do so. Now we are going to talk about historical materialism, and we have all the dolls back and everything. So we are going to start with it. If let me just have a look if anyone has any question in the chat. Okay. So we are going to start with this. So let me give you in a very brief summary of what we talked about when we talked about idealism. When Hegel talked about dialectics, he was an idealist. He believed that everything is coming from the mind. The mind is reflecting the social reality, and it's not the other way around. He believed in the holy Geist. He believed in the entire structure of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis that we discussed in dialectics. So this is what we have studied, right? So before understanding historical materialism, we have to understand what is materialism. Matlab, what is materialism? It is not the abuse ki acha, so no. What is materialism? In materialism, it is believed that the matter is the fundamental substance in nature, so the objects around you, and that all things, including mental states and consciousness, are results of material interactions. So how you think, how you live, how you have a social consciousness, or how you think about yourself, how you think about the world, everything is not coming from your mind. It is not your nature. It is coming from outside, from the socio-economic realm that you are coming from. So if someone is dying of depression, it is not a mental failure or it is not a personal failure. It is some kind of objectified exploitation that is happening on his or her socio-economic paradigm, in his or her socio-economic life, that has caused it. Because everything that you have, all the objects, the matter which is all around you, that is having a strong impact over what kind of mental state you are in. They say, a lot of people say, when I clean the house, I feel like studying a lot, like much more organized now. So your surrounding is going to have an impact on you, not that you have an impact, right? So it is also called as physicalism. That is materialism. What is historical materialism? So first concept is historical materialism is the theory of history. It is the theory of history. It is how history has developed over the period of time in the socio-economic realm. How has history developed? What are the different kinds of histories? So there is a historic development because of something, like, for example, if you sit in a car and you want to travel, so there's something which is moving. The car is moving, right? Naturally. So in the same way, with time, as even Hegel said that, he said that history is nothing but the holy Geist and everything, and the Christian Prussian state is the most important one. India, China, all of them are stuck in the past and everything. Our state model is the best. So historic materialism says that history is moving over the period of time because of the modes of production. And these are what? Socioeconomic conditions of the mode of production. So Marx says that the first historical act is the production of material life. This is indeed a historical act, a fundamental condition of all history. So he means that from starting from the very first time when human being emerged and then they started hunting, gathering, to the time right now when we are stuck in a pandemic, there has been a constant historic evolution. So what is it? What are the stages of it? So this is what he says, that in every stage of historic evolution, in every stage of history, as the history evolves, you'll understand the oppressed are allowed once every few years to decide which particular representative of the oppressing class are to represent and repress them. So even if we are not in the master, so he's talking about master slave dialectics of Hegel, but not in that. He's talking it in form of a metaphor, that irrespective of which historical you modernize, you develop, your society develops, but you will still be, if you're, there will be someone who is suppressing you, and then you will be there who is getting suppressed. So he starts from, now here this is very important, this idea is very important. So here is an idea of alienation also. So when Hegel was basically talking about that, when the universe started or when history started, there was absolute spirit. And what is history? History is basically the entire process through which the absolute spirit wants its liberation, right? And all the thesis, antithesis, everything is happening inside of him, or the Geist, whatever. So the concept where there is no separation between the subject and the object, when there's no, like for example, if this is you, this is your family, this is your state, and this is your Geist or the Holy Ghost, right? The Holy Ghost contains all of it. It contains you, it contains your family, it contains your state. So for the Holy Ghost, there is no difference between subject and object. And this particular phase where there's no difference between the subject and the object in the absolute spirit or the Holy Ghost, it is called as totality. There's no differentiation between the subject and object. We had understood that why do we have this analysis? Because when I am looking at something, I am the subject, and what I'm looking at is the object. But in the Holy Ghost, when the universe started or when history started, there was no differentiation, is what Hegel is saying, right? Then with a period of time, what starts happening is that there is a difference between the subject and the object, right? I am the subject. I have my limitations, boundaries, right? And then outside of me is the object I'm looking at. It is not part of me. This creates alienation. We have understood it. And Hegel also said that when there is an overlapping, when you start understanding there's an overlapping between the subject and object, then comes consciousness. And what happens is that the more you stay in what Marx is now going to say is that the more you stay in a capitalistic society, the objects have more control. So what you end up owning ends up owning you, and the object control the material conditions of your life, which can be seen in various stages of historical materialism. So I'll give you again this example. For the first, when Hegel said that in the absolute spirit, there was a of totality where there was no difference between the object and the subject. Eventually everything is within the Holy Geist. Then over the period of time, because of alienation, because of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, as I told you in the graph, how over the period of time it starts moving, there's a separation between the subject and object, which gives rise to alienation. Over the period of time, what happens is that there's an overlapping between the subject and the object. And this little place where there's this overlapping, that is called as your consciousness, when you're getting aware. So when does this overlap? Like when I'm looking at this particular doll, Russian doll, and I start thinking about where it was being produced, what is the history of it, what is it made of, how much did I buy? So I'm trying to have this relation, some kind of understanding of this object in my life, right? So that is some kind of consciousness which I'll have. I told you that there are two kinds of, relations. One is man's relation with, and the other is man's relation with things. So the objects now control the whatever I'm buying, or whatever, I am paying my labor for, I'm getting a salary, all of that is controlling my life now. So now what Marx is saying is, he says that leave Holy Ghost. There's nothing as Holy Ghost. Religion is the opium of the masses. Forget about it. Yes, he says that there was a concept of, now we are talking about the first stage of historical materialism. He says that yes, there was totality. There was a phase in human history when there was no difference between subject and object. This phase, the first phase, was called as primitive communism. So historical materialism is nothing but stages, 6 stages that Marx talks about. The first stage is primitive communism. What is primitive communism? When during the time when man was a hunter and gatherer, there was gift economy. Like there was no salary, there was no money, there was no currency, there was no idea of private property. This is my land, get out. This is my tree, get out. Right? People used to do things for each other as a gift. That okay, it was like without any kind of idea of return, right? So it was an egalitarian society. There was this concept of social equality, and social relations were basically intertwined, right? So what is happening in primitive communism? He's saying that this is a primitive form of communism. Communism is where when there's no there's a classless society, there's no concept of religion, state, currency, all of that is not there. It is a very nascent form of communism, which is the stage one from where all of us have arrived. And here, when he wrote the book on the origin of family, private property, and state, he says that during this time, what was happening, that people were not producing a lot. Whatever they were producing by using their own hands, plucking fruits, eating whatever, they were consuming it immediately. So there was no surplus. When there was no surplus, there was no profit motive, there was no capital accumulation, there was no hoarding, nothing was then. So everyone knew that they had to work every day, not for any kind of money or status, name, fame, affluence, but because that was how they had to live their lives. This was primitive communism. There is no subject object, in the sense that an early man doesn't see the other neighbor or the other fellow comrade or fellow early man as something outside of him. He doesn't have this entire idea that he is different than me, he's the other, because there's nothing which can other, there's no class. Okay, I am an early man, I wear these leaves, I am so elite. The early man who wears brown leaves, he's not very elite. There's no idea of class divide. Mute yourself. Shh. So the idea is, what I'm basically talking about is that there's no differentiation between you and the other. How do you define that there's a difference between you and the other? Because of few socioeconomic realities, right? Or how you look or whatever. But what I'm talking about here in the primitive communism is that there's no othering. There's no different subject or object, right? Someone's mic is not mute. I would request all of you to have a look, because I can't unmute it from here. Okay. Then came another stage of historic mode of production, which is called as the Asiatic society. But I'm not dealing with that in detail. But here what he's saying is that with the adoption of agriculture, so when the early man becomes a farmer or he starts using land, so there is no concept of, that land has to be owned by one person only. The community comes together to own the land. Everyone owns the land. So this kind of concept, which was seen in India, which was seen in the Asian economies, this kind of concept was seen, especially with the revolution of agriculture that happened in the Neolithic age. So what happened was that new forms of craft started emerging, like people started making pottery, brewing started happening, baking, weaving, sewing, so many other forms. Apart from just agriculture also, there were other venues of earning money started. right? It led to the birth of class along with the emergence of private property. So imagine कि जैसे if you're a hunter gatherer and you have no idea or consciousness कि सामने वाला आपसे अलग है, whatever, and there's no reason where you can have that kind of differentiation. Then over the period of time you understand that okay, this is land can give fruits, we can own land, the community can own land, because till now we don't have individual realities that this is mine, that is yours, we don't have it. But then what started happening, that people also started getting into different professions, like I'll become a tailor, I'll become a pottery maker, I'll become a tea maker, I'll do baking, I'll be a cook. Where will you do all of that? You need a place to do all of that. You can't do it outside. No, there has to be some place where you will put your utensils to cook, where you will have your needles to do the weaving. There has to be some place, right? So what was that? Over the period of time, people started having these kinds of workshops in their homes. So if I allocate that this is a part of this or this place, which is where I'll do my production of cooking, baking, or whatever. So this is my place, my private property, mine. The idea came, mine. And the very moment that this idea comes, this is the emergence of private property, that this is mine, you can't trespass it. The second stage, which is the stage of historical materialism, is ancient mode of production. So what happens over here? It is a slave society in a city state. So like you had Sparta, Athens, all of that. These are what? City states. So there was slave society. Understand, when the idea of the Greek idea of democracy, as I keep on repeating, the Greek idea of democracy was not egalitarian in nature, in the sense that it didn't have equality. It didn't have it was not democracy, or the voting rights were not meant for women, slaves, and foreigners. So democracy as a concept, which was there, be it in Greek city state, or be it in America when it got independence in 4th of July 1776. It was not. In America, you were not talking about black men, you were not black men, women, or native Indians. So the very idea of democracy or equality, that everyone is born equal, had its own paradox, because you were not putting, when you're saying everyone, you're not counting women, you're not counting slaves, you're not counting foreigners. So during those Greek societies or the city state, what used to happen is that there was slavery as a mode of production. Pehle, you started understanding that this is my private property, this is where I will produce, I will cook, I will do my sewing, I will do baking, this is my land, or whatever. And then you started the human being who was inferior, because of whatsoever reason according to your context, as your own property, that this is the person that I am buying. So when you used to buy slaves, it was a document, like you buy a refrigerator, so you sign a document, right? Or if you buy a car, if you buy you take an EMI, you buy a car, or you buy something, you get a receipt, right? In the same way, when slaves were bought, it was a written contract. Can you imagine that? So what here Marx is saying, that even here there is no alienation between a subject and an object, because slave is an object. Slave doesn't have consciousness to think about ki I am a subjective person. Slave thinks of him as an object. What am I? I am a tool with which my owner can do whatever work he wants to do. Slave does not have his own subjective life. So there is totality. When does a conflict start? For example, when I start objectifying you, like when this common interpretation that don't objectify me, when women say. But if so, this means that women think of themselves as subjective creatures, having their own, sensory thoughts, their own mind, their own identity, right? But at that point of time, slaves never thought it that way. Never thought in that way. They didn't have their own personal identity. Nothing. And they had no conflict with the fact that they were used as tools. No. They thought that this is a common, why did they think that way? I'll tell you. But this was that, yes, this is what my society is and everything. Around 200 AD, during the Roman Empire, this is the culture which Marx talks about, that the ancient mode of production. You have workshops, you have slavery, right? Now we come to the third mode of production, which is a feudal society. So you can see a very simplistic narrative that the peasants are there, the knights are there, the nobles are there, and then there's a king. So here the king has some kind of theocratic or religious, that he's not a reincarnation from, but the lineage is from God, Christianity, whatever. So there's no separation between the church and the state in feudalism. But now comes hierarchy, and now comes alienation. A king is different from the noble is different from the knight, a knight is different from the peasant. These are different hierarchies which have been set in the structure of that kingdom. This happens after the fall of the Roman Empire, that feudalism starts. And the primary form of property in the possession of land in reciprocal terms. So, for example, you have the who is controlling the entire land of the kingdom, and there's a nobility and the clergy after the king. After that, you have knights who are going to fight in military battles with other kingdoms, and then eventually you have the peasants. So here you can see that there is a certain kind of hierarchy which has been created, and all of it starts with the idea of land ownership, right? You still don't have factories, but there is alienation. Now the peasant who is there, the peasant is able to look at knight and understand that, okay, I'm not a knight, I'm a peasant. So there's this class consciousness that comes. There's this alienation also that comes. Okay, I'm not the king. Okay, I'm not a clergy. I'm not the noble. In primitive communism, there was no hierarchy. Here you have classes. You have classes formed in feudalism, right? Then you have the stage 4, which is capitalism. So what is capitalism? I've been talking, the entire webinar is about capitalism, but what is capitalism? What are the features of capitalism? So the first is private property. Private property can be anything: your bank, your church, your temple, your factories, anything which is not communal is private. You can't enter. It's illegal to enter. You can't. It's private property. Then the second feature is labor is sold and purchased. You sell your labor. So when you make your CV, and you make a very good CV and you give it to your for hiring and everything, what are you doing? You're selling yourself, right? So it is what you're telling, that I'm very good at all these things. This is my labor that I can do for you, right? And this is the money the wage which I should get in return, or whatever, some kind of negotiation you can have. So you are selling yourself and you're being purchased in the market, right? Then there is currency, there's ownership, there's classes: bourgeois, proletariat, or bourgeois, petite bourgeoisie, then proletariat and lumpen proletariat. There is monopoly of one particular business, like Facebook has monopoly, Amazon has monopoly, control over completely. You have alienation. You know that, okay, I'm a proletariat, I'm not as privileged enough as a bourgeois. There's alienation. There's a difference. You have a different kind of relationship with the objects that you hold, and different kind of relationship with the men or women of your class. And then you have exploitation. So these are the features of capitalism. So we'll understand it with his quote. He says that teach a man to fish. So imagine what happens in capitalism. I teach you that go ahead and you fish. But the fish that you catch is yours. You have to sell it in the market so that you can get some kind of money out of it. You're not fishing because you want to consume it. You're making it into a profession because your livelihood is dependent on it. They belong to the person paying him to fish. Also, you can't go ahead and take fish from your hand, right? You need tools for fishing. You need a bait and everything. So whoever is supplying you that bait and that knowledge or training is owning you. And if he is lucky, then you might be, paid enough to okay, you fished around 10 fishes today, so we'll take 8 and you get 2, if you're lucky. Or okay, your fishing days are Monday to Friday, but Saturday, Sunday you can fish, you can't fish, whatever you want is your, if your employer is benevolent, right? So this is what capitalism is, that you learn something, but you don't learn it for yourself, you learn it to fulfill someone else's dream. And the modes of, the means of production, the technology or capital that you're using to produce something is not your own. You're dependent again on something else which is outside of you. He also says that goods are produced for sale rather than own use. What he says is that you don't produce things to consume it by yourself. You're producing for business to get money out of it. The capacity to do useful work for labor power is brought and sold in a market. So when you finish your graduation, you make your CV, you start applying for jobs. Your capacity, which is there to do a useful work, is reflected in your CV. It is your labor power that, yes, I can do all of this. This is the past academic degree that I have, and this is, what I can learn and all of that. You apply at one company, they start paying you, say, 30,000. Then after 1 year, you apply at another company, you start getting 40, 50,000. So you are being bought and sold in the market itself. I'm ruining a lot of things by this, but that is the truth. For a period of time, like time rate, or for a specified task, piece rate, labor power exchanged for money wages. So for example, I am getting paid for a particular time period that I will be with the institution, with as many lectures or as much of academic work that I'll do. And then if I quit and go to another organization, what happens? That another organization is going to pay me for that time that I invest, right? And the amount of work which I'm doing, what am I producing? How many people am I teaching? What am I doing? The use of money as a medium of exchange takes place. So I'm getting paid. There's something in return. Your money becomes a private property also. No one has money, doesn't have any master, keeps on changing hands. So your money again is something which, so how do you value yourself? You start valuing yourself on the amount of money that you're earning or what your package is. And this gives an important role to banks and financial intermediaries. The moment money will come, you'll have banks. The production process is controlled by the capitalist or their managers. But the production process, the way I am working, the way many like me are working, is controlled by what? With the bourgeois. So we understand a couple of things. The first is that I'm not producing. So how, for a teacher, how it will be that you are not studying or learning for yourself, for your own knowledge. You're learning and studying to teach. So if you're doing MA or BA, you're not learning and knowing for your own knowledge. You're doing it because you have to pass an examination. You have given money for that course. One of the reasons why fluid learning is fluid in the respect of it, that you're not learning for any ABC reason. So the use of money comes over. You start valuing yourself on the basis of the money that you're earning, your package. And you are always controlled by whoever is controlling. So whoever is controlling Delhi University is also controlling. Whoever is controlling the MHRD is also controlling Delhi University. You see the status. So I am there, then there'll be the vice principal, then there'll be the principal, then there'll be Delhi University's dean, then there'll be Delhi University's vice chancellor, then the chancellor, then UGC, MHRD, then the president, prime minister, whatever. So you understand the hierarchy which takes place. So this is creating also a certain kind of alienation when I see that there are different classes, right? He also says, but money itself is a commodity. But money is also a commodity. Money is also produced, right? So money is a commodity. It is an external object. Money is what? It is an object also. It is capable of becoming private property of any individual. The more money you have, this is mine, right? The entire debate that should you give money to beggars or not? My money, my salary. When you see your mother or all of people bargaining with the vegetable seller for 5 rupees, Right? My money, just like my property, my house, you can't enter. My money you can't use without my permission. As simple as that. So thus social power becomes the private power of private persons. The raising of wages excites. So when when you will start working with every year, there'll be a time of appraisal, which right now in the pandemic might not happen. But anyway, so what happens that every year you look forward to April or the beginning of the new financial year, thinking that I'll get more money, I'll get a bit more money, then I'll do this and that and this. Eventually you'll realize that no, you're spending more but not doing anything, but you'll get more salary. So saying that this entire reflex that you have in your mind, that I have to get rich, I have to earn more money, I have to do this, I have to buy this, I have to go on a Euro tour, I have to do this, buy more stuff, have more money, buy more land, whatever, start my own business. What is it? It is this capitalist mania which is there, because every slave tries to imitate their master. So in the same way, every proletariat also, like the petite bourgeois, so every proletariat is trying to emulate his or her master, and or their master. And the work, what happens is that in this excitement you are just showing your capitalist reflex for more money, right? And you start measuring your own value, you start comparing yourself with your friend's salary or whatever. It's all dependent on money. He also says that in reality the laborer belongs to capital before he has sold himself to capital. So he's saying, this is a very deep thought, he's saying that before you have, so now right now you're a graduate, you have not entered your market, but you have anyway sold yourself even before you have entered the market. His economic bondage is both brought about and concealed by the periodic sale of himself, by his change of masters, and by the oscillation in the market price of the labor power. So everything, so for example, right now you're in your graduation or post graduation, and then you realize that I have to get ready for a better job and get good marks and all of that. Eventually, that you enter the market and get a good lifestyle, an identity, name, fame, affluence for yourself, right? And what happens is that you start understanding, Kecha, I will have a better CV because I will then be better in competition with my peers. I'll have more internships. I'll have more prizes. I'll have more achievements in comparison to others. Right? You're in the future because your CV should be better. Why should your CV be better? Because you have to be sold into the market, right? So you're in your first year, and then you're thinking about 3 years or 4 years from now, or what will happen. Some examination you want to crack. Why? Because then that is making your CV better, adding more to your value, even before you have entered the market. A child of a beggar, child of a factory worker, child of a worker, child of a housekeeper, the moment a child has born, that moment itself, he or she is ready to be sold into the market. He's going to help his father. He's not going to get time for education, right? Capitalist production, therefore, under its aspect of a continuous connected process, of a process of reproduction, produces not only commodities, not only surplus value, but it also produces and reproduces the capitalist relation. On one side, there's the capitalist, and the other is the wage laborer. So, what he's trying to say is that even before you enter the market, you're already sold. Why are you sold? Because of the structure, because of the system in which you are living. That it is not an Indian specific case. In any market, because the market is there in every country now, in every society, every part. So on one hand you have the capitalist, and on the other you have the wage laborer. Here comes the fifth stage of historical materialism. Here is socialism. Marx also calls it the first phase of communism, later socialism, that there is no private property, everything is owned by everyone. There's a state which is deciding, there is a presence of state which is showing, because you need some kind of monitor which is going to make sure that everything is owned by everyone, to each according to his needs. You give money, or you give, because there is money in this socialism, you give money, you give aid, whatever, according to the need of the person. So if there are 5 people who are working together, and all of them are working in a factory, but someone who is coming from a very poor background should be paid more, irrespective of the fact that the someone who's coming from a better middle class background is investing more time. So to each according to his needs. There's a dictatorship of the proletariat. Like who is controlling? Who is controlling the state? Who is controlling? It is the proletariat which has always been exploited. And the working class effectively owns the means of production. Remove the body text. The working class is owning the means of production. He also says that for us, the issue cannot be the alteration of private property, but only its annihilation. You cannot say that, okay, because eventually what will happen if there is private property and you say that the proletariat is going to control it, then the proletariat is going to become the bourgeois. You don't want any kind of distinction. So you don't want private property. So think about this in this idea. My father always used to say that, look at Soviet Union when I was like a kid and we used to stand. So my father will take my hand and I'm like in standard 3 or standard 4, and he'll tell me about Soviet Union, he'll tell me about America, and he was telling me about Soviet Union, and he said that uh, everything is paid by the state. So what is the expenditure of a family? Expenditure of a family is what? In medicine, healthcare, daily needs, grocery, all of that, in transportation, in eating, miscellaneous items, rent. This is the expenditure. This is why you need salary, right? But if all of this is paid by the state, so you don't have to labor unnecessarily in other things. You are actually free to do whatever you want to do. All of that is paid by the state. You do whatever is good. So what he's trying to say is that, say, for example, in capitalism, in America, people are into double shifts jobs. They work in 2 shifts every day. Imagine how broken the system would be, is what Marx would have said now. For us, the issue cannot be the alteration of private property, but only its annihilation, not the smoothing over of class antagonisms, but the abolition of classes. He's saying that there has to be a revolution. We have to change the entire structure. Even if it is violent, we have to change the entire structure. For real wealth is the developed productive power of all individuals. It's not the money that you have in your locker. The measure of wealth is then no longer in any way labor time, but rather the disposable time. That what is the measure? How rich are you? It is not someone who has a lot of things, but someone who needs less, right? Is called rich. Just the inverted thought. In the same way, you will become rich or you will become liberated when the entire time structure of 9 to 5 is kept away, when it is taken away for these hours or whatever, but you have more disposable time. So imagine a work life of 4 hours a day of working, and then you're left with so many hours of doing leisure activity of whatever you want to do. In a capitalist society, if you take a gap year and then everyone will be like, oh my god, what did you do in that gap year? It is seen as a failure in your CV, right? But in a socialist society, it would be like, you can go ahead and say that I was trying to explore this particular literature or this particular country or this particular realm of thought, which will never be looked down upon because your thought or leisure is not. So why is leisure unproductive? Why is it called unproductive if you just immediately graduate and don't get a job? Because there's this desperation to put you into the market and make you earn things, right? And there should be some salary. You should be, what is your value? The value is the salary that you are able to get, right? And if you're not doing that, and if you are doing else, like you want to suddenly feel as if that I've studied for 3 years or I've studied for my MA and everything, now I want to study for myself, I want to start something for myself, I don't want to work, I want to take some time off, the capitalist society will look at you and think that you have gone nuts. It is unproductive. Remember Adam Smith ka to alag hi, he had unproductive and productive labor differentiation. But what I'm trying to say is that your time is money, right? And if you're not doing something in the market, as in if you're not buying, selling yourself through your labor, then what are you doing? You'll be dependent or a parasite or on other people or you're on your family. Why can't you be judged? Why can't a society be empowered to that level where you have leisure time to do whatever you want to do? And it is not a character assassination of how productive or unproductive you are. You are able to have a livelihood with 4 hours of work and the rest time you study or do any leisure activity. Art, culture, poetry, literature, everything has come out of leisure. a 9 to 5 job that artists do. Any artist cannot get into a 9 to 5. Okay, from tomorrow I'm going to make a painting. Van Gogh will say that from 9 to 5 in the day I'll work. That doesn't happen in that way. Now the final state, which has never happened, even if China says it's communist or whatever, the final stage is communism, the last stage of historical materialism. There's no private property, just like socialism. There's no concept of religion, state, class, or currency. It's an equal society, egalitarian society. There is no individual person. Everyone is connected. There's more human interaction. A house may be large or small, Marx says. Understand this thought. कि एक घर बड़ा या छोटा हो सकता है as long as the surrounding houses are equally small or equally large. Then you will be like, okay, there's no difference between the subject and the object. Right? Every house is the same. How will you know that you are different? Once you go out and see that, oh, there are different houses, bigger bungalows, whatever. But till then, you're okay. If a palace suddenly comes in front of the little house will shrink into a hut. In the sense, what Marx is saying, कि अगर एक palace you construct, so that is a palace, whatever, but the little house will start thinking of itself as a little hut, not even a little house. This is the impact of capitalism. That is why we do not want an unequal society. And he is also against the state and communism, that why you don't have the state is because that government hears only its own voice. It only hears its own voice. It knows it hears only its own voice, and yet it deceives itself that it hears the voice of the people. So the government is not having empathy or, sympathy for the people. It is just an ostrich with a head, right? He also says that communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of production. So he's saying that capitalism, basically, what does it do? It creates this bourgeois which controls over your reality, your identity. This kind of subjugation is created by capitalism, and communism is the opposite to it. So you have the thesis as capitalism, the antithesis as socialism, and the synthesis is communism. And with that, the history is going to end. Communism will not become a new thesis because it is an egalitarian society. There is no inequality. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. So to that he says, that okay, it is such a repulsive or radical idea that there'll be no private property and there'll be no currency, there'll be no state, all of that, and you'll think that okay, then if there's no such structure, everyone will become lazy, right? Just as you think that don't give poor people a lot of time because then they'll start getting drunk. So what Marx is saying to this is a very smart rhetoric answer. He's saying that okay, so till now the bourgeois hasn't really worked. The bourgeois just controls the slave laborers. It is from the beginning of sugar plantations to even now. So you are trying to say that the bourgeois is lazy. So he disturbs the entire analysis, right? So don't think. The first requisite for all happiness of the people is the abolition of religion. He sees that religion, because Marx and Engels, they believe that the more you believe in God, and God is something which is outside of you, the more alienated you are from yourself. And God is something which is created by the mind and not mind that has, like God is not existing, as simple as that. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago, he also says, coming to the previous point, that, because bourgeois, they don't really have so much of manual labor as the slaves do, or as the proletariat do, or even the lumpen proletariat do. So do you think that, they are lazy and sheer idle all the time, and only those who work are the ones who really have value? But then, for example, a rickshawala who works more than you in terms of physical labor and you are working in a bank, you are sitting in your air conditioned room and you're also doing labor, and a rickshaw wala in Chandni Chowk in the hot and humid weather of summers is also working, but he's doing 100 times more work than you, but is getting paid less. So Marx is saying that don't try to refute the entire idea of work being, manual work or any other kind of labor being giving value. That doesn't give value. Labor doesn't give value. The value that you have is through the currency that you get or the wages, and that's it. And we are taking away the entire idea of money because everything will be paid. It's an equal society. Now we come to the idea of mode of production. So we understood that historical materialism is the evolution of history in the various kinds of mode of production. So you had communism, primitive communism, you have slavery, you had feudalism, you had capitalism, socialism, communism, whatever. So what is the structure? So there's a structure of base and superstructure that I keep talking about. It was given by Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian Marxist, but the idea comes from Marx. So say for example, this is my bottle, and this is the base of the bottle, and this is the top, right? So what he's saying in that every kind of society, when there is a mode of production which is higher, when you start evolving, be it from primitive communism to slavery to feudal and capitalism, what is the first step? That you have land, you have nature, you are using tools. If you're a farmer, you'll use different kind of tools. If you are a cook, you're a brewer, if you're a shopkeeper, different kinds of tools. You always need land, you always need nature. So you start from nature, you start exploiting nature, and then you use it to create means of production. So you start creating factories, places where work will be done, your shop, your workshops, wherever. You start creating that, which are means of production, which is the economic. And from that economic infrastructure, you have two kinds of classes. One is the bourgeois and the proletariat. And from the bourgeois and the proletariat is the base. This is the economic structure. Bourgeois or the proletariat is the base. And above that, you have the social superstructure, which consists of family, state, institutions, religion, media, all of that. Law. How do I explain it? So, for example, when you meet someone, there are two ways of understanding that human being. One way of understanding that human being is name, place, age, whatever, gender, outside of the binary and all of that. But a deeper way of understanding is to understand from where, what is the socio-economic conditions from where this kid is coming in this class, to accordingly modify that teaching. So one is, so what he's saying, that we all have this facade of the social superstructure, that this is my religion, this is my caste, this is my identity, this is my school, family, church, temple, whatever. But inside of it, what is continuing it, what is making it continue, is the economic relationship. Everything is economic. So he's saying that economic infrastructure shapes the social superstructure. So the religion followed by Indians is going to be different because they are, in a third world, or the East China, India, they are going to be different, more conservative. In the West, they are going to be much more, because of enlightenment and whatever, they are going to be much more free and extrovert. You'll have a different kind of democratic setup in India. You'll have a different kind of democratic setup in US. You'll have different kinds of colleges, different kinds of learning, education in India, but you'll have better in Yale and Oxford and Cambridge. Why all of this is happening? Because every state is at a particular hierarchy because of the economic development that has gone into it. So behind the facade of all of that, what is continuing this is the economic structure. And this economic structure is the base. And that is it. This is your mode of production as a social formation. And he also says that ideology is something which you can have, like, in the sense that ideology is something which the bourgeois has. So say, for example, when there was caste system of untouchability in India, right? So it was considered normal because it was proliferated, or it was, adhered to by the temples, by the head of the family, by the structure of social enterprises that we had. उस समय वैसा माहौल था. That particular ruling class culture or ruling class ideas are called as ideology. Basically, Antonio Gramsci will go ahead and say it is called as hegemony, giving a different prospect. But he'll say that when the ideology is the culture or the norm of the ruling class, and class consciousness is the culture or the norm of the working class. So for every ideology in opposition to that, there is a class consciousness or class solidarity. In front of every class solidarity, there is this ideology. So little things which are very culturally very normalized, but there is this, it can be a different kind of narrative will be against it. So for example, there is this, yeah, I have not shared the screen, you can see me. So the point is that, say for example, in Bollywood movies, you have this entire hero's character which is stalking, and it has been normalized. Or you have this toxic masculinity where, police comes and kills and all of that, and that is normal, right? What is that? The media has circulated this kind of attitude as normal. Is it normal? No. Women will feel objectified by stalking, right? And then even who are beaten. If the police is beating, who is police beating? The police won't go ahead and beat a minister like that. The police will go ahead and beat someone who's very poor or lesser. So for example, in Netflix, there is this movie which I'll recommend for you to watch, which is Chaman Bahar or something. Jitendra is there in that movie. So in that movie, what happens is that there's this pan shop owner who falls in love with a girl who like shifts just in front of his stall. And because the girl shifts into this house which is in front of his stall, a lot of men start coming and stalking, and then he sell more pan and cigarettes, and he falls in love with her and keeps tracking and stalking when she comes out and goes on. There is in the entire film, you will never have the idea that he understands that he is a panwala and she's from a elite family, not even elite, middle class. That idea is not in his head. It's not in his head. But the most dramatic thing that happens is that when he's beaten by the police and everything for stalking and doing all of that, he's put in the jail, and then he comes out, and the girl's father releases him on bail, and this guy goes to the girl's family to have a cup, because they have given bail, so he goes there. And in that shot, he's looking at the house. He's looking at the house of this girl. And that is where he has the class consciousness that I am not deserving of. He looks at little things like little objects in the house. And he starts having this class consciousness that I'm not rich enough, I don't deserve, or whatever. उससे पहले उसको था ही नहीं. Right. So what I'm trying to say here is that class consciousness comes in the conflict with the ideology. Every time there's the ideology that no, poor, this is the kind of money you can earn. So if you start revolting, there's a trade union, there's a law, labor law, what of that. So you're not just fighting for your own pay or wage. You're fighting for every other worker. When you fight for empowerment, when you protest, you're not protesting only for yourself. There's solidarity with everyone else who's protesting with you, and you're not fighting for yourself. You're fighting for the entire community that you're representing. So this is basically the entire idea of class consciousness and ideology.